Will the price come down on Jurickson Profar for the Royals to go ahead and strike? We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15, and you can find us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Apple, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If this is your first episode ever tuning in, you pretty much won't miss anything as long as you follow that Twitter account. You'll know where I work. You'll know all the stuff that I do, when these episodes will be coming out. Right now, still doing 3 episodes a week, but once we get closer to mid-February, we'll be back to 5 episodes a week. So Monday through Friday, giving you all things Royals baseball, unless it's like last episode where we had a little bit of league-wide talk. But today, going to be strictly about the Royals, and most days, it's going to be strictly about the Royals. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Well, still no moves since Michael Lorenzen re-signed with Kansas City a few weeks back, and I know that's made a lot of people restless when it comes to the Royals and what they could be hoping to see the Royals do before pitchers and catchers report here in a few weeks. In fact, I think we're just under 3 weeks until the Royals pitchers and catchers go to surprise. Then a few days later, of course, it'll be that full squad workout. We will be down there in person for the full squad workout, and I think that Tuesday, so Saturday through Tuesday of that week is what we plan to be scheduled for. And we also plan to give you episodes each and every day that we're down there. Going to try to get a lot of player interviews that I can make available somewhere. Doubt it would be on camera just because I won't have anything to set up out there. But definitely will try to get audio interviews with numerous guys down there and even some minor leaguers that I know you're very excited to hear from. But the first segment today is going to center around the idea, I guess, of Jurickson Profar becoming available, going in the wheelhouse of what the Royals are looking for when it comes to adding that middle-of-the-order bat. And I think at the beginning of the offseason, Jurickson Profar, to me, felt like a pipe dream. And it wasn't so much of the price. I thought that, he could be in that range of what Kansas City would be willing to offer. To me, it far more was on the side of he's going to re-sign with San Diego. I mean, he wants to go back to the Padres, but the Padres' unwillingness to give him a deal makes me think that he's asking for a lot, whether it be multiple years or it be the price of the actual contract. Because if it was very affordable, it's not like the Padres are penny pinching. The Padres can absolutely, make a play for somebody like Jurickson Profar. But he is 32 years old. And a lot of teams out there are trying to factor in, do you give a 32-year-old coming off a career year, a great season, do you give him a 3-year deal where you're paying him into his age 34 and 35 season? Is that going to be beneficial just for your team this year, or are you going to benefit from a deal like this the year after that and the year after that? I understand that it doesn't, necessarily mean a contract sucks or a contract is terrible if you only get one great year out of them. I thought that, the Edinson Volquez deal, to kind of put it in Royals perspective, I thought it was a good contract at the time because you had to replace James Shields in the rotation. Edinson Volquez gave you the 200 innings, and then, he wasn't great for the entirety of that contract, but for when they gave him that deal, what he was able to do in the first year got the Royals a World Series, at least kind of stabilized that rotation. That was a good deal, right? So I look at it in the way of, if you were to sign Jurickson Profar to a 3-year deal and Profar hits 285, runs into 15 home runs, drives in 85, gets on base at a 350 clip, and that's the best it ever gets, and the Royals get back to the postseason, maybe they win the Central, but then he kind of tails off next year and the year after that, I don't think I would see it as a bad contract unless those final 2 years he's just unplayable, right? I think if you have that problem, then I think you could say that contract wasn't the smartest. And I think there is a world in which Profar can fall into that price range. I don't think the Royals would give him something like a 3-year, $45 million deal. But the closer we get to spring training, I do wonder, with Profar being 32, if he goes, maybe I do sign a 1-year deal. I don't think he would like to, because at this point in his career, he would want more security and he would want to be on a competitive team for the remaining parts of his career, right? There's no guarantee that if Profar gets a 1 or a 2-year deal and it doesn't work out, that he gets another deal. He may be bouncing around the league at that point. He may not be able to capitalize off another career year, which is why I think he hasn't signed yet. I think he's planting his feet in the ground pretty firmly about what he wants, and no team is really biting. We've seen the reports out there and the rumors that some teams are talking to him. I want to say that the Blue Jays, shocking the Blue Jays, who have been in on just about everybody, finally landed Anthony Santander, which we talked about on Tuesday's episode. But Jurickson Profar's got interest. That is something that is factual. I think he's gotten interest from the moment the offseason began. But clearly none of these teams have been progressing well enough to get close to a deal. And it might come down to Jurickson Profar saying, all right, it's February 15th. I still don't have a deal, and I need to be careful that I don't, wait to sign a deal until the regular season, and then all my hopes and chances of maybe striking a deal next offseason are gone because I didn't get a full spring training, right? Or I signed with a bad team. I signed with a bad fit. And those are the things that I feel like a lot of players right now that are unsigned are having, run through their head. Jurickson Profar is not the only big name left that doesn't have a deal. And for the Royals, I think their hope for this middle of the order bat, if they are to get it through free agency, is a 1-year deal. I think if they go the trade route, they are hoping that you could have an extra year of control. But, guys like Taylor Ward, who feel like the perfect fit, we've said that multiple times on the podcast, I just don't think the price is there. I think the Angels are asking for guys like Blake Mitchell and Carter Jensen in the Royals organization, and those are guys Kansas City's not willing to part ways with for a 30-year-old outfielder who you'd only have for this year and next year. Profar, to me, is a little bit of the same thing because Profar is 32, and if you give him a 3-year deal and you expect him to be, a big-time product in your lineup, well, you have the hopes and you have the upside that continues for next year and the year after that. But I believe that the Royals are starting to view guys like Carter Jensen, like Jack Caglione, like Blake Mitchell as ones that can really help out the middle of the lineup in about a year or two. For Jack Caglione, it could be as early as this year. I believe, I'd guarantee it that if things go well, he would be up at the beginning of 2026. If they go really well, you're talking about late 2025. Carter Jensen, kind of the same thing. Have his spot opened up for him. I think that his bat could really travel well throughout the minor league system and all the way to Kansas City. So when you're making these decisions about the middle of the order bat, you don't want to, I guess, lose sight of those guys actually being a big-time part of your lineup, right? If Jack Caglione can help you in 2025, and I know it's a big if because he's never had a full season at the minor league level, but if you feel like he can be the answer there, well, then the solution should be let's find that stopgap guy who can help us now and just bridge the gap to Jack Caglione. Maybe that's me jumping the gun and expecting way too much from a guy that we just don't know yet how great he can be in professional ball. Such a small sample size, right? And I thought the tail end of last year when he did get to Quad Cities, you had a guy that was very fatigued. He was worn out. He was a two-way player at Florida, and he had played a lot. He had been in the College World Series, a lot of games. And college baseball, of course, starts earlier than Major League Baseball. So I think some of those numbers you look at, if you go to Baseball Reference or just minorleaguebaseball.com, they're not that great. But I do think that it was all fatigue related. I think that if he gets to Quad Cities or AA Northwest Arkansas and starts tearing it up, the Royals would feel very good if they just had a guy in a one-year deal, like a Randall Grichuk, maybe like a Yohan Moncada. I know we've brought him up a few times on the show. But if you have that one-year deal, you can use a stopgap guy. You're not paying a lot of money. You're not doing anything crazy to your payroll. And that's what, the Anthony Santander deal made me start to think, is that one of those deals where Toronto really regrets it about midway through the season, where if Santander's not living up to it and you go, man, we got this guy on the hook for another 5 years. With Profar, would that be a similar type of deal where if he doesn't start playing well, it's not like you could sit back and say, well, he's 26, 27. We got him for 3 more years. That's not going to be too much of a problem. The guy's 32, and the guy was thriving in a lineup that had a ton of star power. The Royals just don't have that type of star power, right? It would be nice if they did, and I think Profar could be a good fit in Kansas City, but there is that risk in there. I don't think it's as simple as, well, he's available, he's worth $15 million. You go ahead and strike that deal. I think that if you got it to 2 years, I would listen a little bit more. If it was like 2 years, $32 million, I could live with it, to be honest with you. If it was a little bit more in the salary and less in the years, I think I'd be all right with it because I think Profar can be a big piece for this lineup. But if you're talking 3 or 4 years for a 32-year-old, I view it in the same way I viewed that Anthony Santander deal. Whereas I just don't think you're going to get a great player for 50% of that deal. I think you are more so front-loading that deal and hoping for the production to happen in 2025 and 2026. With Profar, numbers were great in San Diego in 2024. Numbers were really bad in 2023 in Colorado. So which version would you be getting, and what would you have to give up for that player? To me, I think the Royals would be interested because he's a corner outfielder, because he can be that middle-of-the-order presence. It would be one of those things that it would probably come down to the years there and him being more of that solution for the now, but he's not the solution for 2, 3, 4 years down the road. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, I got a great question from a follower on Twitter yesterday, and I wanted to be able to address it. Would Yordano Ventura have really changed the Royals in the late 2010s? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first and our title sponsor today in Gametime. They've now made it easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time in searching through thousands of tickets. I know we got a big game in Kansas City that's coming up, AFC title game, round 4 between Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen in the postseason. If you haven't gotten tickets yet, I strongly urge you to go to Gametime. They make it so easy on you, and you can see where the best prices, the best deals are just on their app. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It is game time. So again, on Twitter yesterday, it was the death anniversary of Yordano Ventura. Had passed away, all the way back in 2017. It was not long before the Royals reported to surprise. He had died in a car accident back in the Dominican Republic. It really shook not only Kansas City, but the baseball world. I think if you vividly remember that, you can recall just how much that changed the perception of the Royals. It changed the perception of the future there. I mean, it was jaw-dropping. It was so tragic and so heartbreaking. And so yesterday, every time on the 22nd, people will post the videos out there. I did it. The great highlights from 2014 is Game 6 start, probably the most memorable. him getting in dust-ups with Manny Machado, chirping at Mike Trout, chirping at Adam Eaton that led to a brawl, and Edinson Volquez throwing a haymaker punch, and Lorenzo Cain going at Jeff Samardzija. I mean, he was an icon for those teams. He wasn't the best player, but you knew when he was on the mound, and he was must-watch TV. The numbers later in his career didn't really indicate that. I think that he was so phenomenal in 2014 and set himself up to be this ace of the rotation for years. I mean, I remember back in 2014, being only 23 years old and throwing 7 shutout innings in Game 6 of the World Series against the Giants. You're probably thinking at that point as a baseball fan, that's the next Pedro Martinez. I mean, the way he carried himself, the flair, staring Pablo Sandoval down and Hunter Pence, and throwing 102 on the road in Anaheim to, get guys like David Freese and striking out Josh Hamilton and Albert Pujols. He really felt like he was the next Pedro Martinez. And I'm pretty sure that Yordano Ventura idolized Pedro Martinez, though a lot of players did growing up in that sort of time period. But this question comes from, a follower on Twitter. I'm sorry, my phone is frozen right now. I wanted to be sure to give you credit, but hopefully this segment alone will do justice enough, because it was a fantastic question of how things would have been different if Yordano Ventura was on that team, was on 2017, was on 2018, because maybe you forgot, but he had just signed a long-term extension in Kansas City. So the Royals were believing that the best of his ability was still yet to be seen. It was to come. I think the 2017 season went as it should have. They went 80 and 82. It was the last year for the entire core together. And I remember that when that season ended, you could just point back to the passing of Yordano Ventura and feel like this makes sense. So the reason I say, yeah, it checks out, they went 80 and 82, is because I don't think they ever got over that. And to be honest with you, I can't speak for them, but I think today that's still something that weighs heavily on you. Some maybe more than others, guys that were closer to him, but you lose a teammate, and you lose him in that way and at that age, it rocks your entire world. It shakes everything up. And if you can remember, the 2017 team got off to a terrible start. It really wasn't until June and July that they turned things on, and then they were buyers at the deadline, tried to make one last push. It didn't work out, bringing in guys like Melky Cabrera, and they made the Padres deal with Brandon Maurer, Ryan Buchter. It never really came to be, and it felt like that team was always climbing uphill. And so I thought, after this question was posed to me on Twitter, what would it have been like? I don't think I could sit here and say Yordano Ventura would have been the ace that everybody expected him to be, because you can remember back in 2015 and 2016, there were some ups and downs, right? He wasn't a overly dominant guy like he was in 2014. And I do think that he could have gotten there. I think he could have been a multiple-time All-Star. I think it would have taken even more polishing, but the upside was so tremendous. I think for 2017, they would have gotten the postseason. So we'll start there. I think in 2017, Yordano Ventura being on that team, being in that rotation, would have put them in the postseason, because I think they would have had a true number one. They had gone out there and gotten Jason Hamill. Danny Duffy was coming off his phenomenal 2016. Like, you would have had a really strong 1-2 in Ventura and Danny Duffy. But when you go through that, it really affected not just the rotation and not having somebody there. It affected the mental part of the entire team. And we saw that, and I do think that team had a lot more flaws than just Yordano Ventura not being in the rotation. They had a lot of, struggles offensively, some free agent signings. Brandon Moss did not work out. Jason Hamill didn't work out. Travis Wood didn't work out. Joakim Soria didn't work out. So a lot of those things did factor in. But then for the, 2018 and 2019, I think like Danny Duffy was, Yordano Ventura would still be the guy that brought you to the ballpark. Like, you can remember back in 2018 and 19 and 20, you're trying to go to a game, not so much 2020 because it was COVID. But 2018 and 2019, when he was healthy, it's like, oh, Duffy's pitching tonight. We're going to go to the game. Now it's Friday night. Danny Duffy's on the bump. That's more of an incentive to go. I think Yordano Ventura would have been the same way, where, hell, the Royals could be 20 and 48, but you got the Yankees in town. You got the Red Sox in town. Ventura's on the bump. We're going to the game. I honestly think, too, if we're just going off, because, you think about 2018 and 19, the roster wasn't good. So the way it would have played out, in my opinion, is kind of the same way it played out with Duffy. I keep using him as that comparison, but I think he would have become the Royals' biggest trade chip. And I think with the years of control, that contract, it would have been tough to send him off. But seeing Yordano Ventura again in the postseason would have been electric. It probably wouldn't have been for the Royals unless it was in 2017. But I do think that he would have become kind of that idolized piece. I think a lot of teams would have been making plays for Ventura, which is why now when you look at it, he would have turned 34. And a couple of people had asked me, do you think he still would have been in Kansas City? With the way that the years had gone, I don't think so. I think the Royals, unfortunately, would have had to pull the trigger on a deal. I don't know what the return would have been because, hey, back in 15 and 16, the numbers had trended downward, but the upside was always there, right? The talent was always there. He was so electric. The fastball was always going to be running it up, 99 to 100, had such a wipeout curveball. I think some team would have looked at him and said, man, there is some extra potential there that if we get him in our hands, we are talking about a true number one 220 inning guy, leading the league in strikeouts, because that was always intriguing to me. And it does still happen today in baseball. You would think Yordano Ventura was striking out 12 guys a game. By the way he carried himself, by his, overall arsenal, he wasn't much of a strikeout pitcher. And that's the way it kind of happened in baseball. You see guys like Johan Duran for the Twins, like you're throwing 103, 104, 105, yet you're not striking out everybody you face. It's because some guys just put the ball in play, right? They get a lot of outs, right? Yordano Ventura got a lot of outs, but this wasn't much of a strikeout guy. But to me, I think if you wanted to look back and play the what-if game, I think the 2017 team would have made the postseason. I really do, because I think his passing, his death, put so much strain mentally on the team that it led to a slow start. They kind of buried themselves early on. Then they were constantly climbing uphill. And the rotation wasn't as good. The offense took a hit. And then toward the very tail end of the year, after they'd gotten the Padres' arms, Trevor Cahill couldn't do much. If you would have had a full season of health from Ventura and Duffy and Hamill and those guys, you would have had a chance. I think you would have had a chance in that final month to make a push. So that's really the only year I would have looked at. But to answer some of those questions, that'll probably be followed up. And I'm curious everybody's thoughts on what you think the Royals could have done if he had never passed in 2017. I do think that 1 year alone would have been the biggest what if, because it was the last year the core was together. 2018 and 2019, the roster was torn apart. It was down to the bones at that point. And I think he would have been viewed like Danny Duffy as, hey, we do not want to trade him. And if we do trade him, it's going to take a lot. And I mean a lot to move him somewhere else. But every single year, you always feel a little bit sentimental and you feel a little bit sad about it. But for the time you got to watch him, what an electric player he was. And, he was up for the Royals Hall of Fame. He was a nominee. I've looked at in the way that he may not get into the Hall of Fame because of being there only a short time, but you can't tell the story of the 2014 and 15 Royals without Yordano Ventura. I think that, a plaque or a statue would be great for Kauffman Stadium, just because for younger fans that didn't get to see him, that are being introduced to baseball now, that's one way to really tell the story. So I will always say, gone too soon, what a player he was, and we will never forget some of those playoff starts and moments with Yordano Ventura. But what was your favorite moment? Let us know in the YouTube comments below. All right, our final segment is going to be a little bit more humorous, because if you didn't catch it last night, MLB Network and their algorithm, the Shredder, had Bobby Witt Jr. fourth in a ranking. Not the fourth best player in baseball, not the fourth best player of the 2020s, the fourth best shortstop in all of baseball right now. We're going to talk about what a joke that was next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our final sponsor today in SelectQuote. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage of up to $5 million, no medical exam required. And it's more affordable than you think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/locked-on. We're wrapping things up today with the list that MLB Network put out by the Shredder. And for those unaware, maybe you have MLB Network on cable. I have YouTube TV, so I don't have the luxury anymore of watching MLB Network because I really do like MLB Network. And I like the panels they have. I like the shows they have. But I have always found it to be such a joke when they put the Shredder's list out there. And the Shredder's not a person. So we'll get that out in front here. If you were somebody that the Shredder was just some guy with a terrible nickname, you would be incorrect. The Shredder is an algorithm that MLB Network uses based off previous production, a few offensive metrics, a few defensive metrics, but it still makes no sense for what MLB Network did with the shortstop group going into 2025. And if you are curious about the Shredder's list, go over the top 10 starting pitchers right now, top 10 first basemen, top 10 closers. It never makes sense. Like at this point, it feels more so engagement related for social media than it actually is a list, because right after the Shredder had this list come out, the top 10, Brian Kenny, who does a great job, and Mark DeRosa, of course, a former player, managed WBC, now on MLB Network. Just great. Both those guys had Bobby Witt Jr. number one. And I think if you asked every single baseball fan in the world, and that even includes people in Baltimore who have Gunnar Henderson, who is phenomenal as well, everybody's picking Bobby Witt Jr. after the year that he had. And I'm not trying to say that because this is the Royals podcast and I'm biased toward Bobby Witt Jr., because you can absolutely make that case. But numbers-wise, it would be nearly impossible to pick anybody else other than Bobby Witt Jr. But this list didn't have him first, didn't have him second, didn't have him third. They had him fourth. And before I get to this list here, Bobby Witt Jr. had the fifth highest single-season WAR by shortstop all time since 1900. Honus Wagner was in there twice. Cal Ripken, I'm blanking on whoever the other one was. But Bobby Witt Jr. was worth over 10 wins last season, higher than A-Rod's season in 2002. So how does he finish fourth? Well, the Shredder's list has Gunnar Henderson number one. They have Corey Seager and Francisco Lindor ahead of Bobby Witt Jr., and there's Bobby Witt Jr. fourth. It's just an algorithm, right? It's not really meant to be it's not really meant to be an accurate assessment of where baseball is at. I'm not sure exactly what the algorithm is, what all they put into it. All you can say now is that might be the list that takes away the Shredder segment, because this, to me, can fool the average baseball fan. It's going, if the Shredder has Bobby Witt Jr. as the fourth best shortstop, it kind of has to have some validity to it. It has to have some truth to it. But to me, it's just more so engagement at this point. I don't see any other benefit having an algorithm that puts Bobby Witt Jr. fourth to be used on a national network. I don't see any benefit to that. And hopefully MLB Network realizes that. Maybe they love that it can get so many responses, because I follow them on Twitter. I follow them, on pretty much every platform that I have. And it's pretty rare if you get more responses than likes or retweets or reposts, whatever it would be. And MLB Network got that last night because a lot of people, and it was a unifying thing, every baseball fan out there said this is a stupid list. This makes no sense whatsoever. And it's even more humorous that Bobby Witt Jr. led all the three guys that he was trailing in nearly every category. WAR, games played, hits, home run, or excuse me, not home runs. Gunnar Henderson had beat by 5. RBIs, stolen bases, batting average, on base, slug, OPS, OPS plus. He led everybody ahead of him, Henderson, Seager, and Lindor. And defensively, he was one of the best defenders in all of baseball. So there's no metric you could be looking at and go, well, he does lack there. I tried to find out what type of algorithm would be used. And if you're trying to go, well, first half of last year, 2023, he wasn't as good. He didn't really turn things on until second half of 2023, was an MVP level player all of last year. But the algorithm is stupid. I don't see any benefit for MLB Network continuing to use that if it's going to put together lists like that, because there's no way on earth you could have him as the 4th best shortstop. I'm not even sure at this point you could call him the 4th best player. He was second in MVP voting. If you wanted to make the case, Ohtani and Judge 1-2, I wouldn't necessarily fight you. Like, you could make that case because they won the MVPs, but I'd have Bobby Witt Jr. 3. There's all types of arguments for it. There really is. But to me, there's just no way you could ever make a case that he's the 4th best shortstop in baseball right now. He is by far and away the number 1 shortstop in baseball. And going into 2025, he could be the best player in all of baseball. He's going to have to win an MVP first. He's going to have to surpass Aaron Judge. But as a well-rounded player, it's hard to find really anybody else like him. So I am all for ending the Shredder segment on MLB Network. Okay, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, it's going to be another Mailbag Friday, but until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.